Fasting for many people sounds like a sacrifice or a punishment, a kind of spiritual self-control meant only to prove willpower. But when we look deeper, we realize it is born from something completely different, the desire to reconnect with what truly matters. It's not about going hungry, it's about creating space within yourself so that something greater can be heard. The truth is, we live surrounded by excess. Food, distraction, stimuli, opinions, everything shouting for attention. The body is always full, but the spirit empty. Fasting is the opposite of that. It is God's invitation to emptiness, not because He wants to see us suffer, but because only when we stop chasing everything do we realize what we really need. It's like cleaning a fogged lens. It doesn't change what's in front of you, but it completely changes how you see. Imagine someone who never stops, working, dreaming, planning, eating, consuming, repeating. Everything seems under control until one day the heart starts to feel heavy, and without knowing why, this person decides to stop. Not just stop eating, but stop filling the void with what's easy. At first, the body complains, the mind tries to sabotage, time seems slower. But in the midst of that discomfort, something begins to shift. The silence, once disturbing, takes on a new tone, and what seemed empty becomes presence. Fasting has this mysterious power to reverse logic. What the world calls lack, God uses as a tool of revelation. When the body feels absence, the spirit learns presence. When the senses lose stimulation, the heart learns sensitivity. It's curious how, when we remove something physical, food, habits, comfort, God fills it with something invisible yet real. Clarity. It's as if the soul, long intoxicated by distraction, finally wakes up. And then what was once just an ancient practice becomes a personal encounter. Fasting is the moment when a person looks in the mirror without filters. It reveals what's hidden, not because we want to suffer, but because we need to understand what we've been feeding inside us. Sometimes an empty stomach is just a reflection of a heart full of things that were never meant to be there. And when that space opens, something changes. The voice of God, which once seemed distant, becomes audible again. Not because He spoke louder, but because there is finally enough silence to hear Him. That's the beauty of fasting. It's not a way to manipulate God, but a way to transform the one who seeks Him. It helps us understand that the divine presence is not something to be earned, it's something to be perceived. And we can only perceive it when all that is superficial becomes silent. There comes a moment in fasting when everything inside you screams. The stomach tightens, fatigue grows, patience fades, and it's exactly then that you understand. Fasting was never just about food. It was always about who commands whom, the body or the spirit. We live in a generation taught never to feel lack. There's always a button, a screen, a delivery, an escape. The slightest discomfort is immediately filled with distraction. But fasting offers no distraction. It confronts us face to face with what we've been avoiding, the void itself. And when that void appears, it speaks. It shows how impatient our faith can be, how much we seek comfort in stimulation instead of silence, how easily we confuse pleasure with peace. During fasting, physical hunger becomes a living metaphor for spiritual hunger. It's as if the body, by protesting, reveals how it has become the center of our existence. It wants comfort, pleasure, control, but the spirit, it wants freedom. It wants to depend, to trust, to surrender. And it's in this tension, between the desires of the flesh and the cry of the soul, that our relationship with God becomes most real. Fasting is not a test of willpower, it's a mirror of our dependence. It shows how much we resist the idea that we're not in control. It shows how we still believe faith should be comfortable, when in truth it's a constant confrontation between what we feel and what we choose to believe. Some think fasting is a solemn and peaceful act, but in reality, it's an intimate battle. On the first day, the hunger is physical. On the second, it's emotional. On the third, it's spiritual. That's when we begin to realize the body isn't the enemy. It simply reveals the noise that was always there. And it's in that noise that God speaks the deepest, because the pain of abstinence exposes the attachments that keep us from depending fully on Him. Fasting teaches us something routine never does: the difference between needing and wanting. We discover that many of the things we call necessary are merely disguised addiction. We learn that true hunger isn't in the stomach, but in the heart, hunger for meaning, direction, and real connection. And it's precisely at that point of weakness that God reveals Himself most intimately. There's something powerful about reaching your limit and realizing that even when you're weak, you're still standing. Not because you have strength, but because you've learned to be sustained by something beyond the flesh. That's the secret fasting reveals. Spiritual strength is not born from effort, but from surrender. As the body diminishes, the spirit grows. As the senses fade, sensitivity increases. And when the stomach complains, it's as if the spirit whispers, "Now it's my turn to speak." Fasting then stops being a physical challenge and becomes a dialogue between fragility and faith. God doesn't need you to prove anything. He wants you to discover what's keeping you from coming closer to Him. And almost always, the obstacle isn't external. It's the self that refuses to let go of control. When you fast, you begin to see how silently the body commands your decision, how mood, fear, and desire are shaped by impulses that often lack purpose. But by depriving the body of something, you teach the soul to breathe again. And that breath marks the beginning of a new kind of dependence. Not forced, but chosen. It's not a sad renunciation, it's a conscious surrender. At the end of every true fast, there's a kind of clarity no meal could ever offer. You understand that strength was never in what you consume, but in what you can release. Because sometimes you need to lose the taste of food to rediscover the taste of divine presence. There's something unsettling about silence. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence that comes after a prayer with no answer, after a cry that seems to echo nowhere. During fasting, that silence becomes even more intense. You close your eyes, seek a presence, and find only the sound of your own breathing. And for a moment, doubt arises, does God hear me? But God's silence is not absence. It's the ground where He teaches the soul to listen differently. Those who live surrounded by noise learn to speak too much and listen too little. Fasting, by removing excess and quieting the body, creates space where it finally becomes possible to distinguish between divine voice and human noise. It's as if, by removing food from the table, God also removes distractions from the heart. Silence is uncomfortable because it reveals. It shows that our prayers are often attempts to control the divine, not to hear Him. It shows that we seek quick answers to questions that require maturity, and instant comfort for pains that only time can heal. But when the body is empty and the soul is vulnerable, something changes. Haste gives way to awareness, and awareness is the first step toward true listening. Fasting confronts us with a truth we avoid. God speaks in ways that don't always sound like words. Sometimes it's a thought that comes from nowhere. Sometimes it's a peace that makes no sense. Sometimes it's a persistent discomfort, as if the Spirit Himself is calling us to face what we pretend not to see. But to perceive all this, you must be still, not just outwardly but inwardly. During fasting, silence becomes a mirror. You begin to see what truly drives your prayers: fear, guilt, anxiety, the desire for control. And slowly you realize that God was never that distant. He was simply waiting for the inner noise to quiet enough so that we could hear Him in the whisper. It's not that He doesn't speak, it's that we often talk too much. There's a difference between empty silence and silence filled with presence. The first is distance, the second is communion. And those who've gone through a deep fast know. There comes a point when silence changes texture. The same silence that once felt like abandonment begins to feel like comfort. It's as if the very air becomes lighter, as if something invisible were there, watching, sustaining, accompanying every breath. That's when we understand. Fasting is not an attempt to make God speak, but a preparation of the heart to listen. And that listening is not only spiritual, it becomes practical. You start noticing patterns you used to ignore. Rash decisions, careless words, strained relationships. Fasting, by silencing the body, amplifies awareness. And that new awareness is one of the most subtle and profound ways of hearing God's voice. God rarely speaks through noise, because noise leaves no room for discernment. But when hunger sets in, and the body begins to yield, something inside becomes more sensitive. Distractions lose their grip. The restless mind becomes fertile soil for revelation. And it's in that fragile soil that the divine plants seeds that could never sprout in times of abundance. Some believe God reveals Himself only through extraordinary signs. But often He speaks in the space between thoughts, in the pause between breaths, in the gap between what we want and what we need. Fasting is the moment when those spaces finally become visible. Because through fasting, you learn that God does not compete with noise. He waits for the right silence. It's curious how, the weaker the body becomes, the more the spirit awakens. A paradox only understood by living it. The flesh protests, but the soul blooms. And in that contrast, clarity arises. Fasting doesn't change God, it changes how we perceive Him. Silence is not punishment, it's invitation. An invitation to listen without demanding, to feel without understanding, to trust without seeing. When the body quiets and the heart grows still, God's presence ceases to be theory and becomes experience. That's when fasting stops being a religious practice and becomes an encounter, one that doesn't happen through words but through understanding. The kind of understanding that can't be explained, only lived. Silence, after all, isn't the end of conversation with God. It's the moment we finally stop interrupting Him. there's something few people say about fasting. It's brutal, not because of hunger, but because of the mirror it holds before the soul. As the body weakens and the mind sharpens, everything hidden within us surfaces. Motivations, fears, resentments, intentions disguised as faith. Fasting not only brings us closer to God, it also confronts us with ourselves. At first, you believe you're fasting out of devotion, love, surrender. But as the days go by, you realize other voices echo within that desire. The need to feel worthy, the hope of being noticed, perhaps even the urge to bargain with the divine. And that's when fasting stops being ritual and becomes purification. Because God does not seek the abstinence of the body, He seeks the surrender of the heart. Fasting disarms. Without daily stimuli, without food's comfort, without the usual distractions, everything once hidden begins to surface. Repressed anger, vanity disguised as zeal, constant comparison. And as painful as it is to see that, that's where cleansing begins. There is no true holiness without honesty. And fasting is when the Spirit asks, what really moves you? That question is uncomfortable because it forces us to admit we often serve God with a divided heart. We want His will, but we also want control. We want to be used, but on our terms. Fasting then acts like fire, refining gold, separating what is pure from what is not. And the longer we stay in that fire, the clearer the difference between faith and appearance becomes. Some treat fasting like a bargaining chip, as if sacrifice could persuade God to act. But the truth is different. Fasting doesn't change God's mind, it reshapes our soul. It realigns our inner world, restores proportion, and puts focus back where it should have been from the start. The food the body lacks becomes nourishment for the spirit. And suddenly, what once felt like renunciation becomes revelation. During fasting, you can't run from truth. The tired body prevents disguises. The undistracted mind hears what the heart has long tried to silence. That's where many give up, not because hunger is unbearable, but because honesty is. Physical hunger can be controlled, hunger for purpose cannot. And fasting awakens exactly that, the need to live truthfully before God and oneself. It's curious how, when we're full, we can hide everything. But when the body empties, even the subtlest intentions become visible. You begin to see how much you crave recognition, how much you fear losing control. And it's in that emptiness that God works, not condemning but revealing. For He purifies not to punish, but to set free. The purification fasting brings is silent but devastating. It dismantles pride and redefines what it means to be strong. Strong is not the one who resists hunger, but the one who faces the inner self without running away. Strong is the one who allows themselves to be broken, not out of defeat, but because they understand that only what's broken can be shaped anew. And fasting does exactly that. It breaks to rebuild. Many imagine fasting is about proving something to God. But in truth, it's God who proves something within us. He tests our priorities, our love, our willingness to let go of what no longer serves us. And when we go through that process, something inside realigns. The soul, once fragmented between desires and fears, begins to align with truth. And that truth brings freedom. Fasting is, therefore, a silent confession. Every hour of abstinence says, I am not enough without you. Every restrained desire declares, my strength comes from somewhere else. And when that realization becomes real, not just spoken, humility is born, not the kind that displays itself, but the kind that lives peacefully within its own limits. And it's in that place, where human limitation meets divine presence, that fasting finds its true purpose. Because fasting is not a way to reach God, it's the place where we finally let Him reach us. There comes a moment in the midst of fasting when the body no longer fights. Hunger turns into calm. The restless mind finds strange serenity. What once felt like effort starts to feel like dialogue, a wordless dialogue where the heart speaks. That's when you realize something fundamental. Fasting was never about giving up, it was about making room, because in the midst of so many voices, distractions, and urgencies, God rarely competes to be heard. He speaks in the interval between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, in the space where there is finally enough silence to listen. Fasting, then, reveals itself as a gesture of return. It's not a search for rewards, nor a ritual to seem more spiritual. It's simply the sincere attempt to return to the center, to the place where everything began, where faith was not performance but communion. And it's astonishing how, when that reunion happens, everything changes in weight. Pain feels lighter, worries smaller, and God's presence, closer than you ever imagined. The weakened body becomes fertile ground where the soul blooms again. The absence of food becomes spiritual presence. And you understand that fasting was never about controlling the body, it was about freeing the spirit. When the body is silent, the spirit speaks. And what it says deep down is simple: I belong to something greater. There's a peace that defies explanation when that understanding arrives. It's not the euphoria of completing a fast, but the serenity of realizing there's no merit in emptying yourself. There's grace in being filled again, but differently. The physical emptiness becomes the space where God dwells, and what once was absence turns into presence. Hunger, once discomfort, becomes prayer. Every breath becomes surrender. Every heartbeat, a reminder that we depend on Him to exist. When the fast ends, something shifts, not in the outer world, but within. The noise returns, the routine resumes, but there's a subtle difference. Now you know how to recognize silence. You know that behind the noise, there's still a place of rest where God waits for you. And even when the body eats again, the heart continues fasting. Fasting from haste, from ego, from fear. Because true fasting is this: learning to say no to what consumes you and yes to what connects you. That's the divine irony. Fasting, which begins as restriction, ends as expansion. It doesn't limit you, it enlarges you. It makes you see that dependence is not weakness but relationship, that surrender is not loss but trust, and that the greatest purpose of fasting is not to gain something from God, but to let Him gain more of you. Perhaps, after all, fasting is a form of love, a love that expresses itself not in words but in space, a love that says, I want to hear you more than I want to satisfy myself. And when that love matures, everything changes, because the body may be strengthened by bread, but the soul is only strengthened by presence. And that's where fasting finds its true answer. Not in the effort to abstain, but in the courage to draw near. Not in the will to prove, but in the freedom to be found. Because fasting, in the end, is not about what you leave behind, it's about who you let in.